This week's video will take place in the early 2000s. And while that might not seem like so far ago, the car market compared to what it is today has completely changed. The consumer needs for crossovers, SUVs, and even EVs are becoming more and more popular, whether we like it or not. Just 20 years ago, there was a variety of options from Chrysler, Pontiac was still in business, and manual transmissions were still a thing. So while yes, this video takes place what seems to be only 20 years ago, cars from this time period to me are becoming more and more forgotten, but also interesting. If this is your first time watching, I make videos about the cars from the 70s to the 2000s. This isn't just me reading facts from the internet and spitting them back to my audience. I mean, that is partly true, however, I'm a car enthusiast myself, and learning about these cars helps me get a better understanding of these past automobiles. With that, I hope you enjoy this week's video, and without further ado, the Dodge Stratus RT, a car you just do not see anymore. Before we address the purpose of this video, and with all my videos, I like to provide some context that sort of builds up to, in this case, the RT models. During the mid-90s to early 2000s, sedans were still very popular. If we look at Ford in '95, the same year of the release of the Stratus, they offered a whole bunch of sedans. Of course, the Crown Victoria, the game-changing Taurus, the Contour, and even the Escort were all options just from Ford. Looking at what they sell in 2024, man, is it just a complete change. It really goes to show how quickly the car market and consumer demands can change over a brief period of time. The Stratus was this mid-size sedan competing with the rest of the other mid-size sedans at the time. GM had a few, the Malibu for sure, and of course the Taurus from Ford were direct domestic competition. We know the drill. Of course, this wasn't the only car on this platform. Chrysler had their version as the Cirrus, and Plymouth was still alive at the time. They had the Breeze. The Chrysler variant was more luxurious than the others, the Stratus was more in the middle, and the Plymouth was the most affordable for consumers. For 1996 and 97, these cars made the Car and Driver's 10 Best list. They were, as Chrysler called them, the cloud cars, and while they come off as possibly not interesting and maybe rather boring, this cab-forward design from Chrysler along with the LH cars was a huge success. The higher trim levels, at least for the Stratus, were more comfort-oriented versus performance, which is totally respectable. The higher trim levels did come with a slightly more powerful motor. They had the 2.5 6G73 from Mitsubishi. These were in the Avengers, Galants, and the other cloud cars. 168 horsepower, 170 pound-feet of torque in 97 is respectable for sure. GM with their redesigned Malibu for 97 with its V6 made 165 horsepower and 185 torque. If you ask me, I would rather have the Stratus, but that is a biased answer as my dad had one while I was growing up. Let's just say after like 10 years of ownership of that car, it would not go into reverse and we ended up donating it. I would rather have the 4-cylinder for a cheaper price with only 18 less horsepower. I'd rather go the fuel economy route, get better gas, have a cheaper car, than have a little bit more power. That's just me. If you remember me saying this earlier, those Mitsubishi motors were also in the Avenger, another car that is heavily forgotten about. And the reason why I brought this up again is because the Dodge Stratus Coupe would replace them in 2001 with the debut of the second generation. Yes, we are finally moving to the purpose of this video. I will remind you guys, I'm not here to waste your time. I have chapters in the description to help you navigate my videos. With the introduction of the second generation came a new trim line, RT, well, new to the Stratus name. Dodge has had the Coronet and Charger RT in the past, the Viper RT was relatively new, before the Neon SRT4 there was a Neon RT, and even a Dodge Intrepid RT. I would say the Intrepid and Stratus were pretty similar, just the Stratus, as we will learn, their RT line was a bit cooler. There were two different body styles to pick from, either sedan or coupe, and I will first talk about the sedan. They featured a body-colored grille, fog lights, rear deck lid spoiler, 17-inch wheels, performance-tuned suspension, and a few interior touches. 4-speed automatic came standard with the choice of a 5-speed manual. So what do I think of these? Well, before I say anything, it's important to mention what was under the hood. These had the notorious problematic 2.7s with the oil sludge problems. Looking at the outside, these again were like a shrunk down version of the Intrepid. With its RT line, they were equipped with a 3.5 liter good for around 250 horsepower. The 2.7 made around 200. And also, the 2.7 was based on the 3.5, there were just a few tweaks made here and there. The Mexican market with their Stratus RT actually came with the 2.4 turbo that would be later found in the Neon SRT4 and PT Cruiser GT. These motors were pushing 215 horsepower, slightly more than the 2.7. Here's my problem with the RT Stratus sedans. You're not getting any more power than a Sebring or a Concorde at the time, as you have the same exact engine. So that is my opinion on it. I still think they're neat, however the coupes actually offered a different engine. And finally, I am now addressing the Dodge Stratus RT coupe. These were offered with a debut of the second generation. I know there are instances where the coupes or other variants are released a few years later. That is not the case for this car. Chrysler and Mitsubishi have been working on and off since the 90s. There's the Dodge Stealth and Mitsubishi 3000, and there's the Talon, Laser, and Eclipse. I'm probably forgetting a few other collaborations. Anyway, the Stratus Coupe shares its platform, engine, and I'm sure some interior touches with the Mitsubishi Eclipse. This is something I didn't know, and I think it's very interesting to see them working once again. The Sebring Coupe was actually on the same platform as well, and these were made at a former DSM factory in the States. If you don't know what DSM is, that is Diamond Star Motors. This is when they collaborated again in the early 90s. The sedans were all Chrysler made, nothing from across seas was incorporated into those. And that's kind of like part of the reason why I think these coupes were better than the sedans. I'm not trying to bash Chrysler in any way. I think they kind of had poor quality in those early 2000 years, and that's kind of why I like the Stratus Coupe a little bit more. These same cosmetic changes to the sedans were made to the coupes, mainly that deck lid spoiler and wheels along with a chrome exhaust tip were what stood out the most. Now for the most important part, what was under the hood of these? A 3-liter V6, also known as the 6G72, which made 200 horsepower and 205 pound-feet of torque. 0 to 60 in a little under 7 seconds, and that is pretty good for the time. To add, these cars handled pretty well. Come 2003, the coupe was restyled. I think the front and rear both look more aggressive. As we can kind of see the differences here. What do you guys think? And it would go on to live with this style until 2006 when it was replaced by the Dodge Avenger, and they also had an RT line. Another cool factor for these was the fact that a 5-speed manual came standard with the option of a 4-speed automatic. I'm sure if you had to guess the drivetrain, you would be right. These only came in front-wheel drive. But so did the competition. And that's what I'm going to transition on over to. What did the Stratus RT Coupe compete with? And for reference sake, I will stick to the year 2001. Ford had the Mustang and Mercury Cougar. V6 Mustangs made 193 horsepower and 225 torque with the S6 V6. The Cougar had the 2.5 Duratec V6 and those made 170 horsepower and 165 torque. Can somebody please explain to me why they didn't put the S6 V6 in that Cougar? That really doesn't make any sense to me, but yeah, please explain that. Chevy had a few. I think the main competition would be from the Monte Carlo SS with its 3.8 liter V6, good for 200 horsepower and 225 torque. If you're a fan of this generation Monte Carlo, then you would know that there was a supercharged variant and even an LS4 variant, but I believe those were introduced a few years later in around 04 and 05. Also, the Grand Prix GTs had the same V6 as well. I'll even expand to Honda with the 2-door V6 Accords. Those made 200 horsepower and 195 torque. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few, actually I know I'm forgetting a few, but those mentioned above were around the same price and they all had V6 engines, so that's kind of why I bunched them all together. So, if you were a consumer back in 2001 and you were looking for a 2-door coupe that has a little more power than base versions, what are you taking? This should be interesting as I will have a poll up in the community tab so you can vote on your pick. Once the time is expired, I will pin my own comment of the results for those of you watching this later. It is now time for the tier list. This is where I personally rank a car based on all of the research I've done to obtain an appropriate response. And for me, I'm going to go with B tier. Looking at the competition and what was going on during the early 2000s, it seems like these were fairly competitive. Looking at these from a 2024 perspective, you would think they are garbage, especially with the quality from Chrysler during this time. I'm mainly referring to those interiors, but that's not where I'm getting my assessment from. I'm going back in 2001, looking at the competition, looking at what was around the time, and I think B tier is actually pretty fair. So there you have it, the Dodge Stratus RT. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know a lot of my viewers tend to be a little bit older, and so hopefully you guys are interested in the 2000s videos. If not, again, I range from different decades each week. And next week, we are going into the 70s. As always, you guys have a great rest of your week. Stay tuned for next week's video.